The rain had been falling steadily over Rochester since dawn that November morning in 2016. It was the kind of cold, persistent drizzle that soaked through jackets and turned the streets into mirrors reflecting the gray sky above. Laura Ellis stood by the kitchen window, watching droplets race down the glass, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. It was 6:47 a.m. when Robert had left for work. She remembered because she'd glanced at the microwave clock as he kissed her forehead, a quick, distracted gesture that had become routine after 15 years of marriage. He'd grabbed his travel mug, thrown on his navy blue windbreaker, and walked out into the rain without an umbrella. That was typical Robert, practical about most things but oddly careless about others. Dad forgot his umbrella again. Their son Jake had mumbled from the table, barely looking up from his cereal. He was 14, at that age where everything his parents did seemed mildly embarrassing or inconvenient. "He'll be fine," Laura had replied, turning back to pack lunches. Their daughter Emma, only 9, was still upstairs getting dressed, taking her time as always. It was a normal Tuesday morning, unremarkably, painfully normal. By 9:30 a.m., Laura's phone rang. It was Denise from Robert's office at the accounting firm downtown. "Hey Laura, is Robert feeling okay? He didn't show up for the morning meeting and he's not answering his cell." Laura felt the first flutter of concern, light as a moth's wing against her chest. "That's strange. He left on time this morning. Maybe he got stuck in traffic?" But even as she said it, she knew it didn't make sense. Robert was chronically punctual, almost obsessively so. He'd rather arrive 30 minutes early than risk being 5 minutes late. "Could you have him call the office when you hear from him?" Denise asked, her tone professional but edged with mild annoyance. "Of course," Laura said, already reaching for her phone to call him. The call went straight to voicemail. His cheerful, recorded voice, "You've reached Robert Ellis. Leave a message and I'll get back to you," suddenly sounded hollow, like an echo from another time. She tried 3 more times over the next hour. Each time, voicemail. Each time, the flutter in her chest grew heavier. By noon, Laura was pacing the living room, her mind cycling through possibilities. Car trouble, dead phone battery, an accident. Minor, she told herself. Something that would explain the silence, but nothing serious. She called local hospitals. Nothing. She even called his brother David in Syracuse, who hadn't heard from him in weeks. "Want me to drive down?" David offered, concern creeping into his usually laid-back voice. "Not yet," Laura said, though she wasn't sure why she said it. Pride, maybe, or hope that she was overreacting, that Robert would walk through the door any minute with some perfectly reasonable explanation. At 2:15 p.m., she called the police. The officer who took her report was kind but detached, clearly running through a mental checklist. Missing person, adult male, gone for, she checked her notes, approximately 7.5 hours. The tone in her voice suggested this wasn't yet a priority. "Has your husband been under any unusual stress lately?" the officer asked. "Any arguments, financial problems, health issues?" Laura hesitated. There had been stress. Of course there had been. Robert's firm had been struggling. There had been talk of layoffs, restructuring. He'd been quieter than usual the past few months, sometimes distant at dinner, staring at his plate like he was trying to solve a complex equation. But nothing that would make him just vanish. "Nothing out of the ordinary," she said finally. "He's a good man, a good father. He wouldn't just leave." The officer made a note. "We'll send a patrol to check his usual route. Do you know where he was headed this morning?" "The office downtown. He takes Route 104 to the inner loop." "Okay, we'll look into it. In the meantime, try to stay calm. Most adults who go missing turn up within 24 hours. But Laura didn't feel calm. She felt like she was standing on ice that was beginning to crack beneath her feet. By the time Jake and Emma got home from school, Laura had managed to compose herself enough to smile, to ask about their days, to pretend everything was normal. But Emma, sensitive child that she was, noticed immediately. "Where's Dad?" she asked, dropping her backpack by the door. "He's running late. Work stuff," Laura said, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. That evening, as darkness settled over Rochester and the rain continued its relentless assault, Laura received a call from the police. They'd found Robert's car. It was parked near the lower falls of the Genesee River, in a small gravel lot that overlooked the churning water below. The car was unlocked. His wallet was on the passenger seat, containing his driver's license, credit cards, and $43 in cash. His phone was there too, dead, the screen black and lifeless. His keys were still in the ignition, but Robert was gone. Laura drove there herself, despite the officer's suggestion that she stay home. She needed to see it with her own eyes. The lot was cordoned off with yellow tape, police lights casting blue and red shadows across the wet pavement. The Genesee River roared below, swollen with rain, dark and merciless. "Mrs. Ellis, I'm Detective Frank Castellano," a man in a gray suit said, approaching her with an umbrella. He was in his 50s with tired eyes and a kind face weathered by years of bad news delivered to desperate people. "I'm going to be honest with you. This doesn't look good." Laura felt her knees weaken, but she forced herself to stay upright. "What do you mean?" Detective Castellano gestured toward the river. "This location, it's isolated. People don't usually park here unless they're looking for privacy. And given what we found in the car, my husband didn't kill himself," Laura interrupted, her voice sharper than she intended. "I know what you're thinking, but you're wrong. Robert wouldn't do that. He has children, he has me." The detective's expression softened with something that looked like pity. "We found some documents in his glove compartment. Bills, notices from creditors. Was your husband having financial difficulties?" Laura's silence was answer enough. "We're going to search the riverbank," Castellano continued gently. "But you should prepare yourself, Mrs. Ellis. The Genesee is dangerous, especially after heavy rain like this. If someone went in..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Laura looked at the river, at the way the water thrashed against the rocks, violent and indifferent. She tried to imagine Robert standing here making that choice, but the image wouldn't form. It was like trying to picture a stranger. "He's not dead," she said quietly, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to the detective or to herself. "I would know if he was dead. I would feel it." Detective Castellano nodded, but his eyes told a different story. He'd seen this before, the denial, the bargaining, the desperate hope. He'd learned long ago that what families felt and what the evidence showed were often two very different things. The search began the next morning. Divers combed the river while volunteers walked the banks, looking for any sign of Robert Ellis. The local news picked up the story. "Rochester man missing, car found by river." Laura's phone rang constantly. Neighbors, friends, Robert's co-workers all offering help, support, casseroles. But as the days passed with no body, no clues, no answers, the narrative began to shift. Whispers started, quiet at first, then louder, about the debts, about the stress, about a man who might have chosen to escape rather than face his problems. Laura refused to believe it. Every morning she woke up expecting him to be there. Every evening she set a place for him at dinner. The children asked questions she couldn't answer. Emma cried herself to sleep. Jake grew angry, then silent, retreating into his room and his video games. And through it all, Laura kept waiting. Because the alternative, accepting that Robert was truly gone, that he'd chosen the river over his family, was something she simply could not do. Not then, not yet. The rain finally stopped on the 5th day, but the storm inside Laura Ellis was only beginning. 3 weeks after Robert Ellis disappeared, Rochester was blanketed in the first snow of the season. Laura stood in her driveway, watching the flakes drift down like silent questions with no answers. The house behind her felt too large now, too empty despite the children moving through its rooms. Every corner held a memory of Robert. His reading chair by the window, his coffee mug still in the cupboard, his jacket hanging by the door like he might walk in any moment and slip it back on. Detective Castellano had become a regular presence in her life, appearing every few days with updates that weren't really updates at all. No body had been recovered from the Genesee. The river had been searched 3 times now, with divers going as far as Lake Ontario where the river eventually emptied. Nothing. It was as if Robert had simply evaporated into the November rain. Sometimes the river doesn't give them back, Castellano had told her gently during his last visit. The currents, the depth, the cold. A body can travel miles, get caught in debris, or sink where we can't reach it. But Laura had stopped listening to theories about bodies and rivers. She'd started her own investigation, one that the police seemed to have already abandoned in favor of their neat, tragic narrative. She began with Robert's office. His boss, a thin man named Gerald Mitchum with wire-rimmed glasses and a permanent expression of mild anxiety, led her into Robert's cubicle. It was exactly as Robert had left it that morning. Organized, methodical, utterly ordinary. A photo of the family at Emma's last birthday party sat on the desk. Laura picked it up, studying Robert's face. He was smiling, but now she wondered if she could see something in his eyes. Strain? Fear? Or was she just projecting, trying to find clues in a smile she'd seen 1,000 times? Robert was under a lot of pressure, Mitchum admitted. perched uncomfortably on the edge of the desk. We all were. The firm lost 3 major clients in the fall. There were going to be cuts. We hadn't announced it yet, but Robert knew. He was smart enough to read the writing on the wall. Was he going to be let go? Laura asked, though she dreaded the answer. Mitchum shifted. Probably. His performance had slipped. Nothing dramatic, but enough to make him vulnerable. He seemed distracted. Made a few errors on the Henderson account that cost us. I'd spoken to him about it just the week before he disappeared. Laura felt a surge of anger. And you didn't think to mention this to me? To the police? I told the police everything, Mitchum said defensively. Look, Mrs. Ellis, I liked Robert. He was a good guy. But he was struggling both here and... He stopped himself. And what? Nothing. I shouldn't have said anything. But Laura wasn't letting it go. She moved closer, her voice low and insistent. What weren't you going to say? Mitchum sighed, removing his glasses and rubbing his eyes. There were rumors. Office talk, nothing substantial. Some people said they'd seen Robert at a bar on East Avenue a few times, middle of the day. Someone else said he'd been meeting with someone. A woman, but nobody knew who. Like I said, just rumors. Laura's world tilted slightly. A woman? I don't know if it's true. Office gossip, you know how it is. People see things, make assumptions. Laura left the office feeling like she was walking through fog. A woman? Robert? It seemed impossible. They'd had their problems. What marriage didn't after 15 years? But an affair? She'd never suspected, never even considered it. Unless she'd been blind. Unless there had been signs she'd missed while she was busy with the kids, with her part-time work at the library, with the mundane machinery of daily life. That night, after Jake and Emma were in bed, Laura began going through Robert's things with new eyes. His closet, his dresser, the boxes in the garage where he kept old papers and college memorabilia. She felt like a thief, invading his privacy, but desperation had made her ruthless. In a box of old tax returns, she found something that made her hands shake. A credit card statement from August, 3 months before he disappeared. Charges she didn't recognize. A hotel in Buffalo, a restaurant in Ithaca, a jewelry store in Syracuse. She grabbed more statements. June, July, September. A pattern emerged. Regular trips, charges in cities she knew Robert had no business reason to visit, and he'd been paying this card from a separate account she hadn't known existed. Laura sat on the garage floor, surrounded by evidence of a secret life, and felt the foundations of her marriage crumble around her. Who had Robert been? The devoted father who coached Jake's little league team? The husband who brought her flowers on their anniversary? Or someone else entirely? Someone she'd been living with but had never really known. The next morning, she brought the statements to Detective Castellano. He studied them in his cluttered office, his expression unreadable. This changes things, he said finally. We'll look into it. Check the hotel records, interview staff, pull security footage if any still exists. Do you think he's alive? Laura asked, and realized it was the first time she'd allowed herself to voice the question. Castellano leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. Honestly, I don't know. If he was planning to disappear to start over somewhere, this would fit the pattern. The separate account, the unexplained trips, establishing a presence somewhere else. But the car by the river, that's what doesn't fit. Unless what? Unless he wanted us to think he was dead. It would explain why there's no body. It would give him time to disappear completely before anyone started looking for him alive. Laura felt sick. But his wallet, his phone, could be staged. Mrs. Ellis, I've worked missing persons for 23 years. People who want to vanish can do it, especially if they plan ahead. But people who want to die by suicide, they don't usually leave breadcrumbs like this. Over the next few weeks, Castellano's team dug deeper. The hotel in Buffalo confirmed Robert had stayed there twice, both times registered under his own name. The jewelry store in Syracuse had a record of a purchase. A women's necklace, expensive, nothing Laura had ever received. The restaurant in Ithaca had no specific records, but it was the kind of place people went for romantic dinners, not business meetings. But the trail ended there. No one could identify who Robert had been with. No camera footage was clear enough. The woman, if she existed, was a ghost. Meanwhile, the bank investigation revealed something even more disturbing. Robert had been slowly draining their savings for months, moving money into the separate account in increments small enough that Laura hadn't noticed. By the time he disappeared, he'd accumulated nearly $40,000, money that vanished the same day his car was found by the river. Electronic transfer, untraceable, to an account the bank couldn't identify. He was planning this, Castellano told Laura during a meeting in December. Snow was falling again outside his window, turning the city white and silent. For months, maybe longer. The question is whether he's dead or whether he used that money to disappear. Laura sat across from him, numb with betrayal and confusion. How do we find out? We keep looking. We check border crossings, airports, bus stations. We circulate his photo to law enforcement in other states. We wait for a mistake because everyone makes one eventually. But as winter deepened and Christmas approached without Robert, Laura began to lose hope of finding answers. The investigation continued, but quietly now with less urgency. The media had moved on to other tragedies. The volunteers who'd searched the riverbank in November were back to their normal lives. Even Jake and Emma seemed to be adjusting to a new reality where their father was simply gone. Laura tried to hold the family together, but she was drowning in questions. At night she lay awake imagining scenarios. Robert with another woman, laughing in some distant city while his family grieved. Robert dead in the river despite all evidence to the contrary. Robert suffering from some mental break, wandering lost and confused. Each possibility was worse than the last. In January, the police officially classified the case as a probable suicide, with suspicious circumstances. "We'll keep it open," Castellano assured her. "But unless new evidence surfaces, there's not much more we can do." Laura refused to accept it. She hired a private investigator, a retired cop named Marcia Hendricks, who had a reputation for finding people who didn't want to be found. Marcia was expensive, but Laura didn't care. She paid with money from Robert's life insurance, money she felt guilty accepting but desperately needed. For months, Marcia worked the case, following leads that went nowhere, interviewing people who knew nothing useful. She found a former coworker who remembered Robert seemed anxious in the weeks before he disappeared. A bartender who thought maybe Robert had been in his place once or twice but couldn't be sure. A neighbor who'd seen Robert sitting in his car in their driveway late at night, just sitting there in the dark. Pieces of a puzzle that didn't form a coherent picture. A man who was simultaneously devoted and deceptive, present and absent, dead and possibly alive. The investigation dragged through 2017, then 2018, becoming less an active search and more a waiting game. Waiting for a body, waiting for a bank transaction, waiting for Robert Ellis to make a mistake, or to come home, or to finally, definitively, prove he was never coming back. Laura aged years in those months. Her hair began showing gray. Lines appeared around her eyes. Jake grew taller and more distant, anger hardening into resentment. Emma stopped asking when Daddy was coming home. The house that had once been full of life became a mausoleum of memories and unanswered questions. And still, despite everything, the evidence of deception, the likelihood of abandonment, the cold mathematics of a man who'd chosen escape over family, Laura couldn't let go of one stubborn, irrational belief. Somewhere, somehow, Robert Ellis was alive. She just had to find him. By 2019, 3 years after Robert Ellis disappeared, Laura had learned to live in a strange kind of limbo, not quite widowed, not quite married, suspended in a legal and emotional gray zone that had no name or precedent in her life. The investigation had gone cold. Marcia Hendricks had exhausted every lead, and eventually, apologetically, told Laura there was nowhere left to look. Detective Castellano had retired, replaced by younger officers who reviewed the file with detached professionalism, but no personal investment. The case of Robert Ellis had become just another unsolved mystery in a filing cabinet somewhere in the Rochester Police Department. The community's sympathy had an expiration date. At first, neighbors had brought meals and offered to help with the kids. Laura's mother had stayed for 2 months after Robert vanished, cooking and cleaning and trying to fill the void. But eventually people moved on. They had to. Life didn't stop for other people's tragedies. The casseroles stopped coming. The concerned phone calls became less frequent. At the grocery store, Laura noticed how some people avoided her, as if grief were contagious, as if by acknowledging her they might somehow invite the same chaos into their own lives. Jake was 17 now, a senior in high school, transformed from the pudgy, cheerful kid who'd eaten cereal that last normal morning into a tall, angular young man with his father's jawline and his mother's wary eyes. He'd stopped talking about Robert years ago, had seemingly excised him from memory like a surgeon removing a tumor. When Laura tried to bring it up, gently, carefully, on the anniversary of the disappearance or Robert's birthday, Jake would shut down completely, retreating to his room or leaving the house entirely. "He left us," Jake had said once, late one night when Laura found him in the kitchen staring into the refrigerator without taking anything out. "That's all I need to know. He chose to leave and I choose not to care." But Laura knew he did care. She saw it in the way Jake flinched when someone mentioned fathers at school events, in how he'd deleted every photo of Robert from his social media, in the anger that simmered just below the surface of everything he did. Her son was wounded in ways she couldn't reach, couldn't heal, because she herself was still bleeding from the same injury. Emma, 13 now, had taken a different path. She'd become obsessed with true crime podcasts and missing persons cases, spending hours on her laptop researching cases similar to her father's. Laura had found her once late at night on a forum for families of the missing, posting under a username, asking if anyone had advice for finding someone who didn't want to be found. "I think he had amnesia," Emma had told her mother earnestly. "I've been reading about it. Dissociative fugue states, people who just forget who they are and start new lives. It's rare, but it happens. Maybe Dad had one and he's out there somewhere not even knowing we exist." Laura didn't have the heart to tell her daughter that amnesia was the kindest explanation, and probably the least likely. Instead, she'd held Emma while the girl cried, both of them clinging to their own versions of hope because the alternative, that Robert had deliberately abandoned them, was too painful to fully accept. The financial situation had stabilized, but only barely. Laura had gone to court in 2018 to have Robert declared legally dead for insurance purposes. The judge had been sympathetic but firm. 7 years was the standard waiting period for missing persons without evidence of death. Laura had begged, explaining the situation with the kids, the mortgage, the mounting debt. The judge agreed to expedite the process given the circumstances of the disappearance and the police conclusion of probable suicide. In March 2021, 5 years after that rainy November morning, Robert Ellis was officially declared dead. Laura received the death certificate in the mail and it felt obscene, a bureaucratic fiction, a piece of paper that resolved nothing but made everything legally simpler. She could access his life insurance now. She could sell the house if she wanted, move somewhere without memories in every corner. She could theoretically move on. But how did you move on from someone who might still be alive? She'd tried dating briefly in 2020, a librarian at her branch, a kind man named Tom, who'd asked her to dinner after months of tentative conversation. She'd said yes mostly because her mother had been pushing her, saying she couldn't live like a ghost forever. The dinner had been pleasant enough. Tom was nice, educated, interested in her life. But when he'd walked her to her door and leaned in for a kiss, Laura had panicked, making an excuse and fleeing inside like a teenager. She'd cried that night not because she wanted Robert back, she wasn't even sure what she wanted from Robert anymore, but because she realized she was still married in every way that mattered. Married to a memory, to a mystery, to a man who was either dead in the Genesee River or living another life somewhere with another woman, other children, another version of himself that didn't include the family he'd left behind. Tom never asked her out again. The house was too big for just the three of them, but Laura couldn't bring herself to sell it. This was where Emma had taken her first steps, where Jake had lost his first tooth, where Robert had built that ridiculous treehouse in the backyard that they'd never used but couldn't bear to take down. She'd taken a full-time position at the library to make the mortgage payments. Her mother helped when she could, but she was aging, less able to bridge the gaps. They were surviving, but barely. Surviving wasn't the same as living. In the summer of 2021, Laura finally cleared out Robert's belongings. She'd kept them untouched for 5 years, his clothes hanging in the closet like relics, his toiletries still on the bathroom counter, his books on the nightstand marked with bookmarks he'd never remove. It was time. Emma helped, quiet and efficient, packing things into boxes for donation. Jake refused to participate, but Laura saw him watching from his bedroom doorway as they worked, his expression unreadable. In the pocket of an old jacket, Laura found a receipt from a diner in Burlington, Vermont, dated 2 weeks before Robert disappeared. Burlington. She'd been through his papers a dozen times and never found any connection to Vermont. Why had he been there? With whom? For what purpose? She almost called the police, then remembered there was no investigation anymore. The case was closed. Robert was legally dead. This receipt was just another piece of a puzzle she'd never solve. Another question with no answer. She put it in her own pocket, a secret kept from everyone, including herself, as if by holding on to it, she could hold on to the possibility that one day somehow the truth would reveal itself. That fall, Emma started high school. Jake left for college in Pennsylvania, a full scholarship to study engineering. Laura was proud of him, but she knew he'd chosen a school far enough away that he wouldn't have to come home often. At the orientation for parents, she sat alone while couples around her chatted and took pictures with their kids. A woman had asked, making conversation, "Where's your husband?" "He passed away," Laura had said automatically, the lie coming easier now than the truth. Because how did you explain that your husband had disappeared 5 years ago? That there was no body, no closure, no real understanding of what had happened? Passed away was simpler. It required no follow-up questions. By 2022, life had achieved a kind of equilibrium. Painful, incomplete, but stable. Laura had learned to celebrate birthdays and holidays without Robert's ghost looming quite so large. Emma was doing well in school, making friends, joining clubs. Jake called occasionally, stilted conversations where they talked about his classes and avoided discussing anything that mattered. Laura had even started sleeping through the night again without waking in a panic, convinced she'd heard Robert's key in the door. She'd accepted it finally. Whatever had happened to Robert Ellis, whether he was dead or alive, whether he'd planned his disappearance or succumbed to a moment of desperation by that river, she would probably never know. Some mysteries didn't get solved. Some questions didn't get answered. She could live with that. She had to. But in the quiet moments, washing dishes while Emma did homework at the kitchen table, or walking past the river on her way home from work, or lying awake at 3 a.m. when the house was silent and the darkness pressed close, Laura would wonder, "Where are you, Robert? Are you out there somewhere thinking of us? Did you ever love us at all?" And the most painful question of all, if you walked through that door right now, would I even want you back? She never came up with satisfactory answers, but she'd learned to live with the questions, the way you learned to live with chronic pain, not because it stopped hurting, but because the alternative was giving up entirely. And Laura Ellis, whatever else she was, had never been a quitter. In early 2024, Jake graduated from college. He'd gotten a job in Boston and announced he wouldn't be moving back to Rochester. Emma, now 16, was already talking about colleges on the West Coast. Soon Laura realized the house would be truly empty. Just her and the memories and the unanswered questions. She was 45 years old, legally widowed, emotionally exhausted, and still, impossibly, waiting. For closure, for answers, for some cosmic justice that would make sense of the senseless. She had no idea that everything was about to change, that the truth she'd spent 8 years searching for was about to find her instead, delivered by a journalist in Buffalo with a good memory and a persistent curiosity about cold cases. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in March, 8 years and 4 months after Robert Ellis disappeared. Laura was at work, shelving returned books in the reference section when her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Ellis? My name is David Chen. I'm a reporter with the Buffalo News. I'd like to talk to you about your husband." Laura's heart stopped. "What about him?" "I think I might have found him." Laura's legs gave out, and she had to sit down on the library floor, her back against the cold metal shelving. Around her, the library continued its quiet hum of activity, the soft beep of the checkout scanner, the whisper of turning pages, the muted conversation at the information desk. But for Laura, the world had narrowed to the voice on the phone and the 3 impossible words still echoing in her mind. "I found him." "Mrs. Ellis, are you still there?" David Chen's voice was gentle, professionally concerned. "Yes," she managed, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "I'm here." What do you mean you found him?" She heard papers rustling on the other end. "I've been doing a series on unsolved missing persons cases in upstate New York. Your husband's case was one I'd been looking into. About a month ago, I was researching a completely different story in Montpelier, Vermont, a feature on small-town lumber industries. I was interviewing the manager of a sawmill operation, and something about him struck me as familiar. The way he looked, certain mannerisms. I couldn't place it at first." Laura's hand was shaking so badly she had to switch the phone to her other ear. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when I got back to my hotel and went through my files, I pulled up photos from your husband's missing person case. Mrs. Ellis, the man I interviewed in Vermont, is a dead ringer for Robert Ellis. Same height, same build, same facial structure. He's older now, obviously, gained a little weight, has some gray in his hair. But the resemblance it's undeniable." "That's impossible," Laura whispered. "Robert is. He was declared dead." "I know, I saw the records. But legal declarations and physical reality are 2 different things." Chen paused. "Mrs. Ellis, this man, He's living in a town called Waterbury, working at the Green Mountain Lumber Company. He goes by the name Michael Turner. He has a wife and 2 young children. He's been there for about 7 years, according to public records. Started working at the mill in late 2017. Laura felt like she was falling, tumbling through space with nothing to catch her. Late 2017, that was a year after Robert disappeared. A year of searching, grieving, barely surviving. And he'd been in Vermont, building a new life, with a new family. "You're sure?" she asked, though she wasn't certain what answer she wanted to hear. "I'm not certain of anything yet," Chen admitted. "That's why I'm calling you instead of going directly to the police. I could be wrong. It could be a coincidence, just someone who happens to look like your husband. But my instinct says otherwise. I've been doing this job for 15 years and I've learned to trust my gut. What do you want me to do? I'd like to show you the footage from my interview. I recorded it. Standard practice for my features. If you think there's even a possibility it's Robert, we can take it to law enforcement. But I wanted you to see it first before this becomes public. You deserve that much." 2 days later, Laura sat in a small conference room at the Buffalo News offices, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. She told no one where she was going. Not Emma, not her mother, not Jake, who was busy with his new job in Boston. What if Chen was wrong? What if this was just some tragic case of mistaken identity that would rip open wounds that had barely begun to heal? But what if he was right? David Chen was younger than she'd expected. Maybe 35, with kind eyes and an easy manner that didn't match the bomb he was about to drop into her life. He set up a laptop on the conference table and pulled up a video file. "Before we start," he said gently, "I want you to know that whatever you see here, whatever you decide, I'll respect your wishes. This is your story, Mrs. Ellis, not mine." Laura nodded, not trusting her voice. Chen pressed play. The video showed a lumber yard, stacks of wood rising in the background like a fragrant wall. The camera panned to a man in his late 40s wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, a safety helmet tucked under his arm. He was talking to someone off camera, Chen, presumably, about sustainable forestry practices and market demands for hardwood. His voice was confident, knowledgeable, with the hint of a New England accent that seemed recently acquired. And Laura knew. Instantly, irrevocably, she knew. It was Robert. Older, yes. Heavier by maybe 20 pounds. The beard was new, and he'd let his hair grow longer than he'd ever worn it when they were married. But the way he tilted his head when he was thinking, the gesture he made with his hands when emphasizing a point, the small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident he'd told her about on their 3rd date, it was all there. It was him. She must have made a sound because Chen paused the video. "Mrs. Ellis?" "That's him," she said, and her voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere very far away. "That's my husband. That's Robert." Chen nodded slowly. "I thought so. I'm sorry." Laura couldn't look away from the frozen image on the screen. Robert Michael, mid-gesture, his mouth slightly open, his eyes focused on something beyond the camera. Did he? Did he seem to recognize you? Did he act strange at all? No, he was completely normal. Friendly, actually. Talked about the business, his family, how much he loved Vermont. At one point he mentioned his wife was pregnant with their 3rd child. Chen's voice was apologetic. "I'm sorry, I know this must be..." "3rd child?" Laura felt dizzy. In the 8 years Robert had been gone, he'd built an entirely new family. 3 children, a wife, a whole life that didn't include Jake and Emma, didn't include her, as if they'd never existed. "I need to call the police," she said, standing abruptly. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. He's alive. He's been alive this whole time, and She couldn't finish the sentence. The rage was rising now, burning through the shock. 8 years. 8 years of grief and guilt and endless questions. And he'd been in Vermont playing happy family with someone else? "I've already contacted them," Chen said carefully. "Before I called you, I reached out to the Rochester PD. They're aware of the situation. They want to verify it's actually him before they move forward. DNA, fingerprints, that sort of thing. But given what you've just confirmed, they'll probably move quickly." Laura sat back down, her legs no longer capable of holding her upright. What happens now? Now the police get involved. They'll approach him, probably with Vermont law enforcement present. They'll need to establish his identity definitively. And then, Chen hesitated. Then it becomes complicated. He hasn't committed a crime technically. Missing persons who turn up alive aren't usually charged with anything unless there's fraud involved. Insurance fraud, identity theft, that kind of thing. He let us think he was dead, Laura said, her voice hard. He let his children grow up without a father. He stole money from our accounts. That's not a crime. The money could be complicated depending on how it's been used. As for the rest, Chen spread his hands helplessly. The law doesn't criminalize abandonment the way maybe it should. I'm sorry, Mrs. Ellis. I know this isn't what you want to hear. And what Laura wanted was to scream, to break something, to somehow make Robert feel even a fraction of the pain he'd inflicted. But instead, she just sat there, watching the frozen image of her husband, her legally dead, very much alive husband, and tried to process a reality that made no sense. I want to see him, she said finally, before the police talk to him. I want to look him in the eye and ask him why. Chen shook his head. I don't think that's a good idea. Let law enforcement handle it. This situation is already volatile. I don't care. Laura met his eyes, and something in her expression made him fall silent. He owes me that much. He owes our children that much. I'm not asking for your permission, Mr. Chen. I'm going to Vermont, with or without your help. The only question is whether you want to be there when it happens. Chen studied her for a long moment, then sighed. Journalism ethics would say I shouldn't be facilitating this, but human decency says something different. If you're determined to do this, I'd rather be there to make sure it doesn't go sideways. 2 days later, Laura found herself driving through the mountains of Vermont, Chen in the passenger seat, both of them silent as the scenery rolled past. It was early March, the landscape still caught between winter and spring, patches of snow clinging to shaded areas, trees beginning to bud but not yet green. Under different circumstances, Laura might have found it beautiful. They'd informed the police of her intentions. Detective Morrison, who'd taken over Robert's case years ago, had tried to talk her out of it, warning about confrontation and potential danger. But Laura had been immovable. She'd lived for 8 years with questions. She deserved answers, and she deserved to hear them from Robert's mouth, not filtered through police reports and legal proceedings. Waterbury was a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and outsiders were immediately obvious. The Green Mountain Lumber Company sat on the outskirts, a collection of industrial buildings surrounded by vast stacks of cut timber. Chen had called ahead using a pretext about a follow-up interview, confirming that Michael Turner would be on site. Laura's heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears as they pulled into the parking lot. Through the windshield, she could see workers moving around the yard, forklifts carrying loads of lumber, the massive saw in the main building sending up clouds of sawdust. And there, walking toward the office building with a clipboard in hand, was Robert. He looked so normal, so unremarkable. Just a middle-aged man doing his job on a Tuesday afternoon, completely unaware that his past was about to collide with his present in the most devastating way possible. Laura opened the car door. Her legs felt numb, disconnected from her body, but they carried her forward anyway. Chen followed at a distance, his camera discreetly rolling, the journalist in him unable to resist documenting what might be one of the most dramatic confrontations of his career. Robert was almost to the office door when Laura called out. Not his new name, but his real one. The one she'd spoken in love and anger and desperation for 15 years. Robert! He froze. For a second, maybe 2, he stood completely still, his back to her. Then, slowly, he turned around. Their eyes met across the parking lot. And in that moment, Laura saw the recognition, the shock, the fear, and, most damning of all, the guilt. He knew exactly who she was. He'd always known. This wasn't amnesia or a mental break or any of the kinder explanations Emma had dreamed up. This was a choice, and he'd made it 8 years ago. Hello, Robert, Laura said, walking closer, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Or should I call you Michael now? I'm not sure what the proper etiquette is when your dead husband turns out to be alive. Robert's face had gone pale, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Finally, he found his voice. Laura, God. Laura, that's all you have to say? She was close enough now to see the flecks of gray in his beard, the new lines around his eyes. Up close, he looked tired, older than his years. But alive. Impossibly, devastatingly alive. 8 years, Robert. 8 years of thinking you were dead. Of our children crying themselves to sleep. Of barely surviving. And you were here, building a new life, having more children, while we fell apart. I can explain, he started, but Laura cut him off with a bitter laugh. Explain? What possible explanation could there be? You left us. You took our money and you left, and you let us believe you were dead. Do you have any idea what that did to Jake? To Emma? Her voice broke on her daughter's name. Emma still looks for you in crowds, did you know that? She can't let go because there was never a body, never any real proof. And now I know why. Because you weren't dead. You were just done with us. People were gathering now, workers stopping to watch the scene unfolding. A woman emerged from the office, pretty, younger than Laura, with a concerned expression and a hand protectively over her visibly pregnant belly. Robert's new wife, Laura realized. The woman who got the version of Robert that Laura had apparently never deserved. "Michael," the woman called uncertainly. "Is everything okay?" Robert looked between Laura and his new wife, trapped between two lives, two identities, two families. And in that moment, Laura saw something she'd never seen before in all their years together. Robert Ellis was terrified. "No," Laura said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Everything is not okay, because Michael Turner is actually Robert Ellis. And Robert Ellis has a wife and 2 children in New York who he abandoned 8 years ago." She turned to the pregnant woman. "I'm sorry you're finding out this way, but your husband is my husband, and he's been lying to both of us." The woman's face crumpled. Robert reached for her, but she recoiled, stumbling back toward the office. "What is she talking about, Michael? What is going on?" But before Robert could answer, police cars turned into the parking lot, lights flashing. Detective Morrison had kept his promise. He'd given Laura her confrontation, but he'd also been ready to intervene. As officers approached, Robert finally looked directly at Laura. "I'm sorry," he said, and tears were streaming down his face now. "God, Laura, I'm so sorry. I wasn't. I didn't know how to be that person anymore. The debt, the job, the pressure, it was crushing me. I thought everyone would be better off without me. You thought wrong," Laura interrupted, her voice cold. "You were wrong about everything." As the police led Robert away for questioning, Laura stood in that lumber yard in Vermont, surrounded by strangers and the wreckage of 2 families, and realized that finding Robert hadn't brought closure. It had only opened up new, more painful questions. Questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. The interrogation room at the Vermont State Police Barracks in Waterbury was sterile and fluorescent bright, designed to strip away any sense of comfort or privacy. Laura sat in an adjacent observation room, separated by one-way glass, watching as Robert, she refused to think of him as Michael, sat hunched over a metal table, his head in his hands. Detective Morrison stood beside her, along with Vermont State Police Detective Sarah Vega, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd been briefed on the case during the drive from the lumberyard. "You don't have to watch this," Morrison said quietly. "We can fill you in later on what he says." But Laura shook her head. She'd come this far. She needed to hear it from him. Needed to understand how the man she'd shared a bed with for 15 years had been capable of such a profound betrayal. Through the glass, she watched as Detective Vega entered the interrogation room, carrying a folder thick with documents. "Mr. Ellis," Vega began, taking a seat across from Robert. "Or do you prefer Turner?" Robert looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "I don't know anymore," he said hoarsely. "I don't know who I am." "Well, let's start with the facts. Your legal name is Robert James Ellis, born March 15, 1974, in Syracuse, New York. Married to Laura Ann Ellis in 2001. Father to Jacob Ellis and Emma Ellis. Employed as an accountant at Mitchum Financial Services in Rochester until November 2016 when you disappeared. Does all of that sound accurate? "Yes," Robert whispered. "And yet, since January 2017 you've been living in Vermont under the name Michael Anthony Turner. You obtained a driver's license under that name, a social security number, got married to Jennifer Hale in 2018, and have 2 children with her, soon to be 3. You've been working at Green Mountain Lumber for 7 years. Is that also accurate?" Robert nodded, not meeting her eyes. "I need you to answer verbally for the recording, Mr. Ellis." "Yes, that's accurate." Vega opened the folder, pulling out several photographs. Laura recognized them. Photos from the missing person investigation, pictures of Robert's abandoned car by the Genesee River, images of the search and rescue operation. "Take me through that day, November 15, 2016. You left for work, but never arrived. What happened?" Robert was silent for a long moment, his hands clasped tightly on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I was driving to work, taking my usual route, and I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't face another day of pretending everything was fine when I was drowning. The debt, the job I was about to lose, the pressure to be this perfect husband and father when I felt like a failure at everything. I pulled over near the river, and just sat there, thinking about how easy it would be to end it all. Laura's hand flew to her mouth. Morrison touched her shoulder gently but said nothing. I sat there for hours, Robert continued, his voice breaking, trying to work up the courage to do it, but I couldn't. I was too much of a coward even for that. And then I thought, what if I could just start over? What if I could become someone else? Someone without all these failures attached to him? It started as a fantasy, but the more I thought about it, the more possible it seemed. So you staged your own death, Vega said flatly. I left the car there, left my wallet, my phone, everything that connected me to Robert Ellis. I'd been planning it for months without really admitting to myself what I was doing. The separate bank account, moving money a little at a time, establishing an emergency fund. I told myself it was just in case things got really bad, but I think part of me always knew what I was going to do. Where did you go that day? I walked to a gas station about 2 miles away, used the cash I'd been saving to buy a burner phone, called a guy I'd met online, someone who helps people disappear for a price. He picked me up, drove me to Buffalo. I stayed in a motel there for a few weeks while he arranged new documents for me. Birth certificate, social security number, the works. It cost me $20,000. Laura felt sick. $20,000. Money that could have saved their house, paid for Jake's college, given them a cushion during the months after he disappeared when she'd struggled to keep food on the table. He'd spent it on a new identity instead. The name Michael Turner, Vega continued. Where did that come from? It was random. The guy suggested I pick something common, forgettable. Michael Turner sounded like a person who could disappear into any crowd, and that's what I wanted. To be nobody. To have no past, no failures, no expectations. What about your family, your wife and children? Robert's face crumpled. I told myself they'd be better off without me, that Laura would find someone better, someone who could actually provide for her and the kids, that Jake and Emma would grow up without a failure for a father. I convinced myself I was doing them a favor. That's bullshit, Laura said aloud in the observation room, her voice sharp. Morrison glanced at her but didn't contradict her. Through the glass, Vega was pressing harder. You watched the news. You must have seen the searches, the vigils, the devastation your disappearance caused. At any point in the last 8 years, did you consider coming forward? Letting your family know you were alive? Every day, Robert said, tears streaming down his face now. Every single day. But the longer I waited, the harder it became. How do you come back from something like that? How do you face your children after abandoning them? It seemed easier to stay dead, to let Michael Turner live the life Robert Ellis couldn't. Tell me about Vermont. How did you end up here? Robert wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. After Buffalo, I took a bus to Albany, then hitched rides north. I ended up in Burlington, worked odd jobs for cash for a few months. Eventually made my way to Waterbury. It's small, quiet, the kind of place where people don't ask too many questions if you work hard and keep your head down. I got a job at the lumber yard, started building a new life. And Jennifer, your new wife? A complicated expression crossed Robert's face. Guilt mixed with something else. Affection, maybe. Or love. Laura felt bile rise in her throat. I met her at a diner where I was eating breakfast before work. She was a waitress, had moved to Vermont a year earlier to escape an abusive relationship. We started talking and she didn't know Robert Ellis. She only knew Michael Turner. With her, I could be someone new, someone who hadn't failed. So you married her under false pretenses. I know what I did was wrong, Robert said, his voice rising slightly. I know I'm a coward and a liar, but Jennifer saved me. Being with her, having a fresh start, it gave me a reason to keep living. The kids, my kids with her, they've been a second chance at being the father I couldn't be for Jake and Emma. In the observation room, Laura made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. A second chance, she repeated bitterly. Like our children were a practice run he gets to forget about. Detective Vega pulled out another document. Did you know that Laura had you declared legally dead in 2021? Robert's face paled. I saw something about it online. I'd been checking the Rochester News occasionally, trying to see how they were doing without actually reaching out. When I saw the death certificate was being processed, He stopped, swallowing hard. I thought maybe that was best. Clean break. They could move on properly. Except they weren't moving on, were they? Your son Jake developed anger issues, your daughter Emma became obsessed with missing persons cases, and your wife, the woman you made vows to, spent years torn apart by not knowing what happened to you. And you knew all this because you were checking up on them, yet you never came forward. I couldn't, Robert said desperately. Don't you understand? The shame, the guilt, it would have destroyed me to face them. It was destroying me anyway. But at least as Michael Turner I could function, I could work. I could be there for Jennifer and the kids. As Robert Ellis, I was nothing but failure, nothing. Vega leaned back in her chair, studying him with an expression somewhere between disgust and pity. Mr. Ellis, you're aware that while disappearing isn't technically a crime, there are several potential charges you could be facing. Wire fraud for the illegal transfer of marital assets. Identity theft for using fraudulent documents. Bigamy. Given that you married Jennifer while still legally married to Laura, the prosecutor will decide what, if anything, to charge you with. I understand, Robert said quietly. I'll cooperate fully. I'll answer any questions. He looked directly at the mirror, as if he could see Laura on the other side. I need Laura to know that I'm sorry, that I never meant to hurt her or the kids the way I did, that it wasn't about them, it was about me and my own weakness. Laura stood abruptly, unable to watch anymore. I need some air, she said, pushing past Morrison and out of the observation room. She found herself in a hallway leaning against the wall, gasping for breath like she'd been underwater too long. The words echoed in her mind. My own weakness. Second chance. Better off without me. As if 8 years of grief and confusion could be dismissed as one man's mental health crisis. As if abandoning your family was an understandable response to stress. David Chen found her there a few minutes later. He'd been allowed into the building as the journalist who'd broken the case, though he'd stayed out of the observation room. Mrs. Ellis, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine what you're feeling right now. Can't you? Laura said, and the laugh that escaped her was harsh, broken. My husband, my legally dead husband, has been playing house in Vermont while my children grew up without a father, and his excuse is that he was sad and overwhelmed, so he decided to commit the ultimate act of selfishness and call it self-preservation. Meanwhile, I was the one who had to explain to Emma why Daddy wasn't coming to her 5th grade graduation, why he wasn't there when she got her first period and needed him. I was the one holding Jake while he punched holes in walls because he was so angry and confused. But sure, Robert needed a fresh start. Chen said nothing, which Laura appreciated. There was nothing to say. Detective Morrison emerged from the observation room, his expression grim. He's being transferred to Rochester tomorrow. There'll be formal charges filed, though I'll be honest with you, it's complicated. The prosecutor will have to decide what they can make stick. In the meantime, you should probably think about getting a lawyer. Divorce, custody of Jake and Emma, even though they're basically adults now. The financial issues, it's all going to get messy. Messier than it already is? Laura said bitterly. Fair point. Morrison hesitated. For what it's worth, I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of terrible things people do to each other. What your husband did, it's not the worst I've encountered, but it might be the most selfish. I'm sorry you're going through this. Laura nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Through the windows at the end of the hallway, she could see the Vermont mountains, beautiful and indifferent to human drama. Somewhere in this small town, Jennifer Turner, or was it Jennifer Ellis, was probably trying to explain to her young children why police had taken their father away. Laura should have felt sympathy for her, another victim of Robert's deceptions, but all she felt was exhausted. I need to tell Jake and Emma, she said finally, before they see it on the news. They deserve to hear it from me. The story breaks tomorrow, Chen said apologetically. I've held it as long as I could, but my editor is pushing. Missing father found alive with new family. It's going to be national news within hours of publication. Of course it was. Because their private tragedy was about to become public entertainment, dissected by strangers on social media, turned into think pieces about mental health and marriage and the American dream gone wrong. Laura thought about Emma reading the headlines, about Jake seeing his father's face trending on Twitter. The humiliation would be as devastating as the original loss. I need to go home, Laura said. I need to go home right now. The drive back to Rochester was a blur. Chen had offered to accompany her, but Laura declined. She needed to be alone with her thoughts, needed to figure out how to tell her children that the father they'd mourned for 8 years had actually just abandoned them for a better life. How did you explain that level of rejection to people you loved? How did you help them process a betrayal this profound when you couldn't even process it yourself? She called Emma first, from a rest stop somewhere between Vermont and New York, her hands shaking as she held the phone. Mom? Where are you? I've been texting you all day. Honey, I need you to sit down. I need you. There's something I have to tell you about your father. Emma's voice went small, childlike. Did they find a body? No, sweetheart. They found him. He's alive. The sound Emma made was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. What? Where? Is he okay? When is he coming home? And there it was. The hope, the immediate leap to reunion, the assumption that of course their father would want to see them, would have a good reason for his absence, would wrap his arms around them and make everything okay. Laura closed her eyes, hating that she was about to shatter that hope. He's in Vermont. He's been there for years. Emma, he has a new family, a new wife, new children. He changed his name and started a completely new life. The silence on the other end stretched so long that Laura thought the call had dropped. Then quietly, Emma said, "He didn't want us anymore." "No, baby, it wasn't like that." "Don't," Emma interrupted, and her voice had gone flat. Empty. "Don't make excuses for him, Mom. He left us on purpose. He let us think he was dead, and he was just living a different life. He chose them over us." Laura couldn't argue because Emma was right. All the explanations Robert had given, all the justifications about mental health and starting over, couldn't change the fundamental truth. He had chosen. Every day for 8 years, he had chosen his new family over his old one. "I'm sorry," Laura whispered. "I'm so sorry, Emma." "I have to go," Emma said, and hung up before Laura could respond. The call to Jake was worse. He'd answered already angry. He'd apparently seen the story breaking online before Laura could reach him. Someone at his office had recognized the name Ellis and shown him the Buffalo News website, where Chen's article was already live with a photo of Robert being led away by police. "Did you know?" Jake demanded without preamble. "Did you know he was alive?" "No, Jake, I just found out 2 days ago. I was trying to verify before I told you." "So Dad's been alive this whole time, living in Vermont, playing dad to some other kids while we thought he was dead, and you didn't think I deserved to know immediately?" "I wanted to protect you." "From what? The truth?" "I'm 22 years old, Mom. I don't need protection. What I needed was my father, and he decided some other family was more important than his own. Well, congratulations to him. He finally succeeded at something. He successfully destroyed us." Jake, but he'd already hung up. Laura sat in her car in that rest stop parking lot and cried harder than she had in 8 years. Great heaving sobs that felt like they might tear her apart from the inside. She cried for her children, for the innocence they'd lost twice now. First when Robert disappeared, and again when they learned the truth. She cried for the years of struggling and grieving and barely holding together. And she cried for herself, for the woman who'd believed in her marriage vows, who'd searched desperately for a husband who hadn't wanted to be found. When she finally made it home late that night, Emma's bedroom door was closed and locked. Laura knocked softly but got no response. She stood in the hallway of the house that had been Robert's before it was hers, surrounded by memories of a life that had been built on a foundation she now knew was rotten, and wondered how they would ever find their way back from this. The media storm broke the next morning. By noon, news vans were parked outside her house. Reporters called constantly. Laura's phone filled with messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years, all wanting to know if it was true, offering sympathy that felt more like curiosity. The story was everywhere. CNN, Fox News, NPR, the New York Times. The case that shocked America. Missing father found living double life. Laura Ellis and her family were no longer people. They were a headline, a trending topic, a cautionary tale. And Robert was in custody in Rochester, waiting to face whatever justice the legal system decided he deserved. But Laura knew that no courtroom could make this right. No sentence could undo 8 years of damage. No punishment could give her children back the father they'd lost. Or rather, the father they'd never really had. Because the man who could abandon his family so completely was a stranger, wearing the face of someone they'd once loved. The courthouse in downtown Rochester was surrounded by media on the morning of April 15, 2024, 5 weeks after Robert Ellis had been found alive in Vermont. Laura sat in her car in the parking garage, watching the clock tick toward 9 a.m., trying to summon the courage to walk into the building where her husband, her still legally married husband, would face preliminary hearings on multiple charges: wire fraud, identity theft, and bigamy. The district attorney had decided to prosecute aggressively, partly due to the egregious nature of the case, partly due to the intense public pressure following the media firestorm. Emma sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, her face pale and drawn. She'd lost weight in the past few weeks, dark circles shadowing her eyes. She'd barely spoken since learning the truth, moving through the house like a ghost haunting her own life. Laura had tried everything: therapy, which Emma refused, conversations which Emma avoided, even just sitting with her in silence, which Emma tolerated but didn't acknowledge. Her daughter was broken in ways Laura didn't know how to fix. Jake had refused to come. He'd blocked Robert's number when his father had tried to call from jail, deleted every photo of him from his social media, and told Laura in a brief, cold phone call that as far as he was concerned, Robert Ellis had died in 2016, and whatever happened to this imposter was none of his concern. Laura worried about the rage she heard in her son's voice, the way he'd shut down emotionally, but she also understood it. Anger was easier than grief, especially when the person you were mourning turned out to have never really existed. "We don't have to go in," Laura said quietly to Emma. "We can watch from the victim services room. You don't have to see him." Emma finally turned to look at her mother. "I want to see him. I need to see him and know that he's real, that this whole nightmare is actually happening, because part of me still can't believe it. Part of me thinks I'm going to wake up and Dad will still be missing, and at least then I wouldn't know that he hated us enough to just leave." "He didn't hate you," Laura said automatically, though the words felt hollow. "He was sick, Emma. Mentally ill. Depression, anxiety." "Stop defending him," Emma interrupted, her voice sharp. "Everyone keeps saying he was mentally ill like that excuses what he did. But he wasn't too mentally ill to plan his disappearance for months. He wasn't too mentally ill to steal our money, create a fake identity, get married again, have more kids. He was just too mentally ill to love us. And I'm tired of pretending that's something I should feel sorry for him about." Laura had no answer to that, because Emma was right. Mental illness explained many things, but it didn't excuse everything. At some point, Robert had made conscious choices, hundreds of them, day after day for 8 years, and each choice had been to stay away, to maintain the lie, to build a new life on the ruins of his old one. They walked into the courthouse together, Laura's arm around Emma's shoulders, both of them keeping their heads down as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. Inside, the building was quieter, filled with the hushed bureaucracy of justice. Laura's lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Gonzalez, met them in the hallway outside the courtroom. "He's already inside," Patricia said. "Laura, before we go in, I need to prepare you. He looks different than when you saw him in Vermont. The jail hasn't been kind, and his lawyer is going to paint him very sympathetically. Mental health crisis, genuine remorse, no intent to harm. They're hoping for a plea deal that minimizes jail time." "What about us?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "What about the harm he did to us? Does that matter?" Patricia's expression softened. "In a criminal trial, the focus is on crimes against the state, not emotional damages. That's what the civil suit will address, the financial theft, the abandonment, the years of suffering. But today is about whether Robert Ellis broke laws, not whether he broke hearts. I know that doesn't feel like justice, but it's how the system works." They entered the courtroom and took seats in the second row. Laura's eyes immediately found Robert sitting at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, his hands clasped in front of him. He looked smaller than she remembered, diminished somehow. His hair had been cut short, prison regulation style, and without the beard he'd worn in Vermont. His face looked naked and vulnerable. When he turned and saw them, his expression crumbled. He started to stand, as if to approach them, but his lawyer, a public defender named Marcus Wright, pulled him back down, whispering urgently in his ear. The judge entered and everyone rose. Judge Patricia Hammond was in her 60s with steel gray hair and a reputation for being tough but fair. She'd heard every excuse and sob story in her 30 years on the bench, and her tolerance for nonsense was famously low. "Be seated," she said, settling behind the bench and opening the file in front of her. "We're here for the preliminary hearing in the matter of the state of New York versus Robert James Ellis. Mr. Wright, how does your client plead?" "Your Honor," Marcus Wright said, "my client pleads guilty to all charges. We request leniency given the extraordinary circumstances." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Laura felt Emma tense beside her. Guilty. At least he wasn't denying it. Ada Jennifer Reeves rose. "The state opposes leniency. Mr. Ellis didn't simply disappear. He built a fraudulent life, stole marital assets, committed bigamy, and devastated his family. His remorse appeared only after exposure." Wright countered, "My client suffered from severe depression and dissociation. He truly believed his family would be better off without him." Judge Hammond frowned. "Yet he planned his disappearance, forged documents, built a new life. That doesn't suggest incapacity. Mental illness distorts reality," Wright replied. "He sees clearly now and wishes to make amends." Laura almost laughed. Amends. Nothing could undo 8 years of grief. Mr. Ellis, the judge said, you understand you're waiving trial and facing up to 16 years combined? Robert's voice cracked. Yes, Your Honor. I accept full responsibility. Victims' counsel Patricia Gonzalez stood. The family would like to speak. Laura rose, trembling. 8 years ago, Robert Ellis was my husband. The man I loved would never have done this. For years, I searched riverbanks, hospitals, investigators, wondering if he was hurt or calling for help. My children grieved. My son turned angry. My daughter developed anxiety. We thought at least there would be closure. Instead, we found out our nightmare was his choice. While we broke, he built a new life. And now he asks for sympathy. Emma suddenly joined her. I'm 16. When my dad left, I was 9. His last words were, do your homework. For years, I told myself he'd come back. Now I know we just weren't important enough. You want to know what that's like? Sitting out Father's Day crafts at school, lying to friends, pretending he might be dead because that hurt less than the truth. You have new kids now. I hope they never feel what we did. They returned to their seats, both crying. Across the room, Robert sobbed into his hands. Judge Hammond waited for silence. Mr. Ellis, depression may explain your decision to leave, but not the years you let your family believe you were dead. You lived comfortably until discovery, not confession. That's not illness. It's cowardice. She paused, then added, you've committed serious crimes. They're not violent, but the emotional harm is profound. Your guilty plea spares your family further trauma, but it doesn't erase what you did. Laura held her breath as the courtroom fell silent, waiting for the judge's final decision. Therefore, Judge Hammond said, I accept your guilty plea. 3 years for wire fraud, 2 for identity theft, and 1 for bigamy, to be served concurrently, with good behavior, parole eligibility in 18 months, full restitution, psychiatric treatment, and 500 hours of community service required. Laura felt hollow. 3 years, 18 months, for 8 years of deceit. It wasn't justice. Then the judge added, a restraining order forbidding contact with Laura, Jacob, or Emma Ellis for 10 years. They deserve peace. Robert's voice cracked. Your Honor, they're my children. I just want to explain. You had 8 years, the judge said coldly. They'll reach out if they ever wish to. Until then, you'll respect their boundaries. As bailiffs led Robert away, he turned toward Laura and Emma. For a heartbeat, she saw the man she once loved, then the man who'd abandoned them. She took Emma's hand and walked out without looking back. Outside, cameras flashed. Laura read her statement steadily. For us, Robert Ellis remains legally dead. The man sentenced today is a stranger. We ask only to be left in peace. Questions swirled, but she and Emma pushed through the crowd. That night, Emma asked quietly, do you think he ever really loved us? I don't know, Laura said. Maybe he loved the idea of us, but it wasn't the kind of love we deserved. I don't think I'll ever contact him, Emma decided. That's your choice, Laura said gently. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. When Emma whispered, are we going to be okay? Laura held her close. Yes, we survived the worst already. We can survive anything. 6 months later, Laura watched Emma drive off to college, Jake visiting briefly from Boston. The media had moved on, though the Robert Ellis case lingered in articles and lectures about betrayal. His other wife divorced him and vanished from the public eye. As the moving truck disappeared, Laura felt tears, but not despair. Her children were rebuilding, and so was she. Sometimes she thought of Robert in prison, wondering if he regretted anything. Mostly she didn't. He was no longer her responsibility. Healing was slow but real. They were moving forward, learning to live with scars, accepting that even after the deepest betrayal, survival itself could be a victory. Laura went inside, closed the door on the past, and began thinking about tomorrow.